Please pray with me. More of you, O Christ, less of me. More of you, O Christ, less of me. More of you, O Christ, less of me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts draw us closer to, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. So out in Planting Justice's nursery in their garden in the far back corner, the wrap around the water catchment tank has a photo of the hand of one of their formerly incarcerated employees, and in that hand there are seeds. And underneath it is written, "Plants, the plants teach us patience." I am not a gardener. In fact, I am the anti-gardener. If there is a way to kill a plant, I will probably figure it out. If it needs more water, I won't water it enough. If it needs less water, I will drown it. I'm just bad at it. And it's one of the things I'm really clear about that I'm bad about. And I know better than to even really try, because I'm really bad at it. But I married a wannabe farmer. I mean, I grew up in Texas, come to California. She's an interior designer, but what did I get? I got a farmer. Because you can't always pick, you never know what you're going to get. Those fathers knew you don't always know what you've got until it's what it's not. I have to say, I just nearly cracked up because I said, please pray with me, and it went, I was like, okay, that is such an El Sobrani form of prayer. Sorry, I just had to mention that, given that they're kind of loud today. But one of the things I have learned from Colleen is that, of course, time is really important, and where you put things, and that, you know, you pick things that ought to grow in the place you put them and all of that. But the most important thing I have learned from Colleen is actually part of this parable, which is it's really all about the soil. And that the soil is the thing that you farm first. When we first moved to El Sobrante, she spent a long time building the soil before she really planted anything. In fact, our first garden was in a bunch of hay bales while she was working on the soil. And we have terrible soil around here. It's not friendly. All gardeners have told me this, and they'll give me a lot of information that kind of goes shh like that. But I do know that the soil is the most important thing. And at first glance, Matthew in this parable is saying the same thing. You know, where the seed lands matters more than what kind of seed it is, or what your intention was, or even how you do anything else. It's, you know, if the soil's bad, it's just going to be bad. And I think that's obvious. But as I've said many times before, a parable is not a simple little story. One of the things I learned in seminary was that parables aren't just little stories that illustrate a spiritual principle, but parables subvert worlds. So if it's obvious what the meaning of the parable is, you're probably not reading it correctly. And this parable matters because it's in all three of the synoptic gospels. It's in Matthew, it's in Mark, it's in Luke. And all three of them have a little different spin on it. And I think those come from their contexts. Mark is right after the fall of the temple, and Mark is always impatient. And so Mark is really all about the time. And Mark is our most apocalyptic gospel. They think that the end of the world will come any minute, because guess what? The end of the world had come for them. The destruction of the temple and the scattering of the Jews throughout the Middle East was a complete and total apocalypse for them. Mark is the earliest of the Gospels. You get to Luke and Matthew, they're probably a good 50 to 70 years later. Well, now they've been living in the diaspora. And in fact, we think Matthew had a mostly Jewish congregation somewhere in Asia Minor, where they were a kind of hated minority. They were already Jews, but now they've also become Christians, and so, well, double whammy bad. And we all know what that happens when you add one part of marginalization onto another. And so Matthew is less concerned with the immediacy of it. You need to be planting, you need to be planting, you need to be planting. Matthew now knows it's more of a long game. So you'll notice on this bulletin on your back page, you'll see Sacred Rebellion, 250 years and counting, and a story about one of our United Church of Christ firsts. We often say this with a great deal of pride, because we now have 250 years to say, see, we were on the right path a long time ago. This is a story, if you haven't read it yet, of Lemuel Haynes. And I had known his name because he was the first person of African descent ordained by any mainline Protestant denomination, and he was ordained in 1800. Think about that. Served churches in New England, white congregations, but as a black man. But what I didn't know until I saw this article, because of the 250th anniversary of America, is that he had also been a Continental soldier, and he was present the moment that the Declaration of Independence was first read to the people who were not in the room where it happened. He was present when they stood on the steps in Philadelphia and read the Declaration to the people, and people cheered and were delighted. And Lemuel Haynes, as a black man, stood there and said, all men are created equal? How does that square with slavery? Now, I like to think that maybe Abigail Adams was standing there and saying, well, where are the women too? And she did write about that. And Lemuel Haynes immediately wrote about, this is a promise and a good promise, but it is not the reality today. And he made that his sermon, even though his writing about it was not published until he was long dead. And so, like Michelle Obama, he knew he was planting seeds that may never take root, may never grow. But he planted them the best ground he could find, which at that time was in New England. At least they didn't throw him out or slap him in chains. You might say if you're against slavery, you should go to the South, but you know what? You'd just wind up a slave if you're him. And this is where I think we have some information that is useful to us. One is just taking the long view. Bonnie, it is about time, but we can't even put it on a calendar. I appreciate that the calendar comforts you, but when we're planting seeds of change, or we're creating something that is new, like Jesus was saying another world is possible. We do not have to live under the thumb of empire, where everyone is oppressed the way that we are. Those were the seeds he was planting. And you're going to have to grow a lot of soil before that seed can even take root. And it's going to take patience. It's going to take patience. Lemuel Haynes did not live long enough to see the end of slavery in this country. He did live long enough to see the seeds of the abolition movement take hold in New England amongst congregational. Oh, good Lord. Molly Basket, come on in, have a sit.
So much for slipping in.
You can't slip in when I'm talking about congregational history. Molly Basket, yay! One of our beloved pastoral colleagues. I'll tell you more later. He could not possibly know when he was preaching to those white congregations in New England whether they were really hearing him or not, but he did see the beginnings of that abolition movement, even though he never saw what the change would be. There's so many examples of this. Pretty much every person, including Jesus, who ever advocated for a complete subversion of the dominant narrative, and that's what a parable is, subverting reality as we know it, to say that another world is possible usually means you will not see the fruits of your labors in your lifetime. Susan B. Anthony never voted legally. Lemuel Haynes never heard the end of slavery. I will tell you, a few years ago, I never thought we'd get out of construction. Seriously. And we tried to put it on the calendar 50 times. 50 times we tried to say, and we're going to open, and then we didn't. And we're going to open, and then we didn't. We did it over and over. And I remember one of the more frustrating times of that. I told you earlier, I don't do this patience thing. I'm no longer a young woman, but I am in a hurry. I was sitting with Wendy Beckerman, some of you who know her. She was a yoga teacher and spiritual teacher locally who since has died of cancer, sadly. But I was sitting with Wendy, and I was saying, you know, just how frustrating. I think at the time I was probably complaining about PG&E, which, let's face it, is pointless. And she said to me with such kindness, she said, you probably can't hear this right now, but I'm going to say it anyway. Trust the timing. And she was right. I couldn't hear it worth a flip at the moment. And in retrospect, now that we have opened, now that we are here, I guess that's just how it had to go. And there were things we learned from that. And we still, I have a hard time wanting it to be fully here and fully ready and fully all the things we dreamed. But I think a lot about the wisdom I got from Colleen when we first moved here about grow the soil. And I kind of think that what we've done here is a lot of soil. And it needs some more amendments, and I think a lot of people are throwing seeds like mad, and not all those seeds are going to land. In fact, I recently said in a meeting, please don't bring me any more ideas. I do not need ideas. I need people who can plow, who can tend, who can do the work. Because after you create the great soil, you don't just fling it in there and all is well. It takes a little effort. Actually, it takes a lot of effort. And a vision like this is not going to come to fruition on the time schedule we have. It just doesn't. And so we have to keep believing that another world is. That's the part where belief comes in. And I don't know, gardeners here, when you plant something, do you say a little prayer? Do you? Do you? I know Colleen talks to her plants. I've watched her do it. Do you say a little prayer? Oh, please be happy. I will try to give you the right sun and the water, and if you need a little something else, I'll try to figure out what that is. Do you make that kind of agreement with them? And then you wait. And then you wait and you hope that a windstorm doesn't come and blow all the fruit off the tree, or some other thing comes to interfere with your harvest. Because they come. And we can't plan for them all. We can't plan for it. I grew up in a farming place, and yeah, people had crop insurance. But after you've been hailed out a few times, sometimes you couldn't even buy the insurance. They'd say, you're a bad risk. And they're like, it's hail. I can't predict that. We couldn't predict most of what has happened so far. We can't predict what this place will look like in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, when most of us in this room are long gone. But we made soil. We planted a few seeds. We've done the work. And the harvest will come many years after we're gone, even though we're getting a little out of it now. So my invitation to you is to just notice the places in you that are ready for planting. Soil's ready, you're ready to say yes. You're ready to say, yes, that can happen in your own life. And then collectively, we do the same thing in our common life. What are we ready for? What will take root well? And make those choices. And if we have to do some soil amendments, if we have to move things in the sun, if we even have to take a tree down. Colleen and I are talking about taking a tree down, and I never want to take down trees. But if you want to grow certain things, you might have too much shade. I mean, sometimes you might even have to take an axe to something. And that's what the spiritual life is also like. Sometimes we might have to cut out some things. Sometimes we need to add some things. But mostly we have to have patience and persistence, and in time, believe a harvest will come. Another world is possible. Amen.
Amen.